just to kind of recap, I think these are three great, real actionable takeaways. That
Mhm.
first one, don't skimp out on your training and your development and your coaching of your staff. Like,
Number
like
one.
really don't do that, right? And
Mhm.
through that training and the development and coaching, you're going to be able to set actual proper goals, objectives, because you know why you're making those goals, objectives.
Mhm.
Second, special orders. You need to have a process, for those special order parts. And I love what you're saying as far as prepaid special
Mhm.
orders go. And then
Mhm.
thirdly, you need to do that quarterly audit, right? And just make sure that your wholesale accounts are exceeding. You said the baseline was 10%.
For freshly brewed discussion on automotive sales and marketing, this is Coffee with Jason. The Coffee with Jason podcast is sponsored by Closer's Coffee. For that full-bodied, rich, sweet flavor with a bright acidity, drink Closer's Coffee, stay caffeinated, and keep on closing. Find out more at closerscoffee.ca.
Hey, yes, sir. I can hear you.
All
We're
right.
live and in color.
Hey, Shawn, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I've been really looking forward to putting this piece together. Like I said, I just don't think there's enough parts content out there. And I hate to say it, but it's actually pretty difficult to find people that will want to come online and jam with me about parts. So thank you so much for
I'm
taking
your
this time.
guy.
I really appreciate you taking the time to jam with
Thank
me today.
you.
For the people out there that don't know who you are, Shawn, how about that little 2-minute introduction of kind of how you got started in the industry and up till today?
For sure. So I really could start back when I got out of college. I took business management, and when I got out, of course, my whole goal was to become an entrepreneur, own my own business. But when you come out of college, you got no money,
Yes.
really, you got no talent, and so where do we go from there? So my parents were involved with used wrecking yard and also stock car racing. So cars and parts and playing with this stuff, was kind of who I was.
It's just in your
So
blood. That's the way you were raised.
right, exactly. So anyway, I got a job at a Ford dealer, and of course, I started as a shipper. 2 weeks later, I'm a parts person. I'm working the counter. That's a whole story in itself. Pick up the phone is basically it. Hey, you're a parts guy today. It starts today. Pick up the phone. I pick it
Answer
up.
the
Of
phone.
course, I understand
Parts
parts,
been
but
told.
yeah, exactly. So, fast forward, a couple years, I'm then selling heavy truck and school bus parts at the same Ford dealership, when Louisville and Sterling Trucks was a thing. And then, of course, thereafter, I became assistant parts manager and then parts manager and parts manager then for multiple locations and then fixed ops director for, multiple locations. So I've been trained, NADA trained, and also I've been consultant trained for probably a decade. So I'm really well versed in parts, and of course I love this stuff. And then today I run a tech company called NADPE, and we help dealers get rid of idle and obsolete parts inventory. So of course parts inventory and the data and the phase in phase out criteria is my thing.
And I think that's key. A lot of people don't realize how much data is actually involved when it comes to parts. And, they just kind of think that it's just inventory that's just kind of sitting in the back there. But there is a lot of math. There's a lot of planning that goes in to really structuring out a proper inventory. It's not just, I think sometimes, a lot of dealer principals out there may just assume that their DMS system is just kind of managing some of these efforts for them. But it is still, I think, one of the few places within a dealership that does require a bit of a craft, a bit of an art form to it.
Exactly. I mean, where you get all that stuff is training, and of course, formal training helps because it's very specific. Whereas, if you think about training from one generation to another generation to another
Mhm.
generation without formal training, over time it's a dilution of skill sets, and ultimately, if you can't pair a very technical criteria to handle parts coming in, what you consider active and what you consider idle parts inventory, the stuff you shouldn't have, the stuff that doesn't come on a stock order,
Mhm.
can't parry a very technical criteria, then effectively you're using your gut, right? Or you might be using your head, but essentially there's no mathematical methodology behind how you're controlling inventory. That's no different than giving someone your RSP to handle and say, go ahead.
Yeah, I can't stand it when I hear that, and I do hear that comment a lot. Like, well, I feel like we should order this. What the hell do you mean you feel like you should order this? Is it a feeling in the arm? Is it in the
Right,
chest? I mean, how the
right.
hell is that a feeling? I mean, is the freaking numbers telling you should order this stuff or not?
Well, it all comes down to training, right? And basically, when you look at a stock order, the stock order should be an exact result of not what the computer says, but what you've put in and built the system to tell you. So the DMS, I know some guys will say, I don't trust the DMS. I don't trust what the stock order tells me. They don't trust any of the information in it. So they review everything one by one, line by line. And of course, that's key to know that a guy's not technically trained, because every DMS is set up to handle the input on a technical way, a methodology, to be able to qualify what is and isn't for stock. So, I mean, that's key. That's, your cue number one is exactly that. But it all comes down to training, right?
Yep.
I'd like to think of it this way. If I'm a dealer principal, used car inventory in my finance department, I got a handle on, and I'm well trained at it, right? And anybody you put in there has to be at your training level or more, obviously.
Yep.
But when it comes to parts department, that's not the case. But imagine if we ran finance department or used car department and the inventory control exactly like we run parts. It'd be crazy.
It'd be a shit show. That's what it'd be. No, but you're 100% right. There's training, right? And that's just training them on the what to do, and then there's development, right? So we train them on the what to do's, but then we need to develop them to do it better, right? And then there's coaching, and then we actually have to coach them so that their performance continues to rises, and then it actually meets our dealership's goals and objectives. I feel like we get like one level in.
Yeah, right.
Just barely teach them how to actually use the system, and then we don't need continued development. We don't need continued
exactly.
coaching. Like, he knows how to push the buttons.
Well, some of it is so guys will know how to run an operation on a day-to-day basis because they live and breathe it every day. But it's really, how do we handle the money? The investment of capital in parts inventory is the same as the investment of capital in used car inventory. No different. But the lack of resources, for technical resources for parts managers, is kind of where, one of the problems that guys run up against, whether you're a DP or a parts manager or somebody in the middle, a general manager. Where do we get this stuff besides NADA? There are resources out there. I just built an article probably a month ago that lays out all the different resources and where to get them. And besides NADA, which obviously there's some expense, but there's incredible value, right? There's resources that are relatively cheap to get started and get moving on training.
No, I agree with you. Training is the very, very first step, right? They need to understand the activities. We need to develop out those activities to be more effective, and we have to continue to coach them to make sure that those activities are actually meeting what our goals and objectives are. But actually, that's a fun thing. How often have you actually been in a dealership where the dealership actually had a parts goals and objective?
I mean, I would, at least in my bubble. The world that I came from, I mean, we had that stuff, but we were also Group 20 guys. So, that was part of our program. I do think, though, at least my experience with the performance groups is inventory handling specifically, besides measuring, months no sales and how much is obsolete, just measuring the inventory in terms of aging or gross or expense percentages, but actual technical training on how to deal with the inventory to get it in line is not taught. But the dealer group 20 guys, they all have goals and such. I would speculate about the guys outside of that, or they have very general goals or not very specific enough to really get a big handle on inventory control. Think about it like this: every management meeting you have, the dealership has a manager's meeting. Used car inventory is talked about all day, all meeting long, right? Used car inventory, the controllers on it, GM's on it, DP's on it, used car manager, they're all over that. And then it's like, okay, parts, what do you got? Well, I don't know. I got nothing. I got a big order coming in, program order, big discounts. Okay.
I think we've been in the same meetings together. because
You might have. I remember this bald-headed guy, right?
no, because it is. That's literally what it sounds like. It really is. Is that we'll spend all this time over here because I think what it is, unfortunately, in a lot of dealerships, the parts department just gets treated as a support department, not as an actual business generating revenue department in itself.
Mhm.
It's kind of there to support used cars reconditioning efforts. It's there to support the service department, and hey, it'll do a little bit of wholesale. So we're good.
Well, that's a problem for the majority of the industry, but it's also a major opportunity. When you really think
Yes.
about fill rate's a big deal, whether we're talking about retail customer or wholesale customer, but more in particular, your shop, right? Or even used car department reconditioning, how quick you get those things turned around. We know that you're losing money by the day with a used car just sitting waiting on parts, right? So parts inventory fill rate is huge. But here's something that I want people to consider. Think about the process that a customer or even the dealership goes through to handle one single service customer. So first off, the customer has to call. It might go through a receptionist and maybe a BDC person or somebody to book a reservation. Then they come through the drive-through, a service advisor touch it. You got a porter to move the car. The technician touches it. That's only the first half. Then the second half, we do almost the whole thing in reverse order again, right? And then the customer has to come again. Think about if we don't have a part that we should have, and there's a technical criteria, right, where you have the least risk but the greatest fill rate, right? That's what technical methodologies and parts inventory control is about. But think about if you handle this customer twice because you got to bring them back in, you're only getting paid once, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Twice, paid once, you're losing all day long.
Oh, all day long, all day long. So look, I think it's a great, and I think it's good direction. So we'll just kind of keep heading this direction. First step, let's talk about real actionable steps, because sometimes we can sit here and we can talk about, theory and good ideas, but, let's really get this in action plan. Let's talk, it's like, getting your parts department into shape. What does that look like, right? And I think, like you said, the first thing, training.
First thing's training. I would say the very first resource. You can't really do anything if you don't have training because you don't really know where to start, or what to do, or what that even means.
Mm-hmm.
I would say kind of 101. There's a book that Mike Nichols wrote, and I'm trying to think of what it's called, but it's a couple hundred pages, but it's so well written that anybody, whether it's a parts person or a dealer principal, could read this thing, and it's well written, has lots of illustrations and such. But it also will convert you from somebody that doesn't have any experience to somebody that, okay, now I really know what I'm doing and I can do it on a technical level.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean the dealer principal can come in and start running stock orders and such, but the book is so well done that if you're already a parts manager, the technical stuff is like, oh my God, like now I can really get going on this. And if you're anybody else from, fixed ops manager up, and you don't have parts experience, this stuff, it's incredible. I would say start there is
That's a great resource. I appreciate that. In fact, actually, when we do this podcast, I'm going to make sure we put a link in there, because I agree with you. I'm thinking when I had my dealership that I didn't know of a lot of resources. I was kind of left to myself to kind of figure this out. So that's an awesome resource. We'll make sure we add that link down below, guys. So let's say we get them trained. Okay, we develop them out. Then we start really kind of setting up a bi-weekly coaching effort, to make sure that performance or those goals, objectives are being kind of meet. Let's say that portion of it we've completed. We've done let's say that takes 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, right? We really kind of deep dive into this, and then we continue afterwards. Our bi-weekly meetings. What are some of the best practices next to really make sure that we have a well-structured inventory?
Well, first, if anybody is going to move parts department along, it has to be someone that also understands parts enough. So either you need somebody outside, or that can be fixed operations manager all the way up to DP. But you got to have the skill sets to be able to have that conversation with the parts manager who just read this stuff, right? Or who's just been trained on this. If you don't, then he already knows more than you. You're just doing the same thing you've done for the last 20 years, right? So I would encourage you to read that book. The book is actually called Professional Inventory Management Guide version 3 by Mike Nichols. But so you have to, before you can start setting any sort of goals, you got to be well equipped enough to be able to say what that goal looks like. And of course, that book is where you would get it from. I would say Next step is is implementation, which means now you're trained on the methodologies of how to handle parts inventory. And now we need to apply that to the entire parts inventory, not only on what we have on hand, but also how we deal with every stock order and every special order part.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means is you need to take that methodology that you just learned, and it's not super hard, right? This stuff's not rocket science. Then you got to put it in your DMS, right? And your DMS will basically do all the automation for you, right? A lot of guys say, I don't trust the system. It's not the system, it's you.
It's the right structure. Yeah, see, I think that's what people don't understand is that the DMS is just a tool. A tool is only as good as how well somebody utilizes that tool, right? You know, and you can structure that tool to however you want it structured. But if you just, you don't just pull it out of the box and just let it be,
Mm-hmm.
right? You need to give it some defined parameters so that it actually does its job.
Exactly. So, I mean, you'll see guys that will spend half a day or whole day doing a stock order.
Mm-hmm.
If you can take what you know, and if you're using your gut, you can't put it into a computer system because you can't even define it. But when you're technically trained, you can, and I guarantee you every DMS is set up to handle this stuff. You put it in and the stock order pops out, you're just scanning this thing, looking through it and say, well, you know what, maybe a quarter panel doesn't make sense for me, and maybe it doesn't for all kinds of reasons. You can't return it, or, you know, the thing's too big, or, you know, you might want to qualify body parts a little differently than mechanical parts will say. But nonetheless, you're just scanning inventory, your stock order, and say, let's go after it. But also, the reason that guys are scared to order inventory, right, or they're using their gut, is because they don't understand when they order it, what happens and what the probabilities are. When you understand the probabilities, you'll hit the button all day long. You'll know exactly what to do, right? Because they're scared of the risk, because, well, what happens 12 months from now is I'm stuck with this thing. But if you understand the probabilities of getting rid of this thing, and you know, you don't have a problem making decisions. It's very, and you just let the computer do it from there.
Yeah, but you got to take the time. And I think that's the key here is that you need to take the time to really set that up so that the tool can actually do what it's designed to do in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So okay, so there's the next step. Now, once we kind of have, you know, our DMS, you know, working in the way that we want it to work, all right, which, by the way, saves a tremendous amount of time because, you know, I'm not having to do this manual effort now. It's
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's really working for me, not working
Exactly.
against me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what would be that next step to, and we're talking about just trying to get someone to that best level, that highest level of
Mm-hmm.
setup as far as their parts inventory goes.
Well, what happens is when you set up the DMS properly, now
Mm-hmm.
the parts management report actually makes sense and actually reports proper stuff. So what happens then is now it gives you an idea of how this inventory is performing and what works and what doesn't work. I'll tell you that having just defining if parts inventory is good or bad, just solely by the number of 12 months no sale obsolete parts inventory you have is it's a measurement, but it's not the only measurement.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's like saying, well, if my bank account is greater than 0, I'm doing good, right?
Exactly.
It's a measurement.
It's a good analogy, by the way. It's really good.
I wouldn't use that as the only measurement, right?
No.
So what happens now is understanding. Now you're technically trained to understand, you know, where the inventory is and what you should have, what you shouldn't have. But now it's actually putting together a plan on how to gain control of it,
Mm-hmm.
because you will have the biggest eye-opening you've ever had if you've never implemented this stuff before.
Well, it's kind of like what we were talking earlier, you know, before we kind of get started here. You know, like you don't just have an obsolescence problem. You've had a problem. You're just now deciding to deal with the problem, right? It doesn't happen overnight. Isn't that the funny thing? Like it doesn't
happen overnight.
It's not one day you're like, oh shit, I got all this old crap. You know?
So the focus is always on, you know, the 12-month and older stuff, because that's just kind of industry rule of thumb. It's been around forever. And but you know, if you look at used car department and you said, you know, anything that's 120 days old plus is a problem. Of course, you would deal with that 120-day old stuff. That's a huge problem.
Yeah.
But really, when you start looking from the front side and say, well, how did I end up with this piece of junk to begin with? Or if you have a bunch of them, how did I? So what you got to do is you actually got to implement policies and processes to stop it from the front side, not the back side. I mean, the back side has to be dealt with, but it's going to take a long time to clean that up. but you got to start from the front side. How did this thing get here to begin with? And the majority of the problem is not active parts inventory that you've brought in to sell, provided you use a methodology. I mean, if you're winging it, I mean, who knows what you're bringing in.
That's true.
Active parts inventory is not the problem. You know, when it starts to slow down, it's like, okay, these model years are not coming through my shop anymore. It's slowed down. There is a percentage of those on an annual basis that fall off. But basically speaking, your real problem is special order parts, unsold and returned special order parts. And that happens on like day 17. The parts manager finds out customer doesn't need it, tech misdiagnosed, over-ordered, wholesale customer doesn't want it for whatever reason. That thing's a problem on day 17, not on day 365.
No, so what would you say best practices, best activities? You know, how do we try to, like I said, we don't just have a problem. We've had a problem. You know, let's try, like you said, we'll try to nip it in the bud. You know, in early on. What is that? What do those best practices look like for you? What are you recommending to dealerships?
In order to clean up the problem from the front side?
To ensure that it doesn't become a problem in the first place.
Yeah, so really, I mean, first and foremost, of course, it's training. And then it's get your DMS in line with the methodology, inventory control methodology that you learn. And then the next step is implementing policies and processes to protect the dealer from owning a special order part that's been returned or unsold. And there's a whole list of things which that entails, but it means, you know, implementation time.
So, okay, so let's talk about some of those policies and processes. What would you say top three policies and processes that you would say that really do affect that bottom line?
In terms of aging parts inventory,
yes,
make it out of the way. So I would say you need to absolutely implement prepaid special order parts. Okay. And that means over the counter. That means in the retail shop. That does mean internal too. I know I'll have a lot of haters right now, but that's okay.
No, actually, that makes sense. I've seen it happen, and you know, it's like the used car manager. You know, we had a special order part on a vehicle that we don't normally carry, and then all of a sudden he decided to wholesale the damn thing instead of retailing it. And here we are. We got this part back here for a 2012 Volvo XC90, and I'm a Toyota dealership.
Or we've sold it, right? And now it's like, oh, well, it's sold. We don't need to put this on. But you're like, no, parts department's still stuck on this thing, but we still have a customer running around with this thing on there. So I would say the most pushback in prepaying special order parts you'll have is not from the customer. In fact, it's all in your head. And the most part of the pushback that you'll get is internally from your people who are scared to implement it. They're scared of the customer pushback, especially in parts. We are technical people, right? Not so much customer people. That's true. Okay. It's true. Hey, look, I'm one of them, right? I'm one of those guys.
We're just gonna throw it out there. You're right, though.
That's awesome. But
I remember I had this parts manager, one of the most amazing guys in the world. I mean, I could eat lunch off the floor in the parts department. I mean, it was just immaculate. I mean, he had his thumb on the pulse of our parts department, just in a beautiful way. But I would agree with you. You know, this is how it was. Parts hold. Parts hold.
That's the industry. Parts hold. Parts hold. Parts hold. I mean, I cringe when I hear that. I mean, I've developed some over the years. I'm not the parts hold guy anymore. But,
yeah.
Well, yeah, that's. I mean, you wouldn't allow that in sales. It drives me crazy, right? Because you wouldn't allow anything that happens in parts, and I'm not knocking parts by any means.
Yep.
We're doing the absolute best. We're drinking from a fire hose, right? Yep. And we don't have all the resources, and we're doing our best. But you know, with the lack of attention becomes, you know, a lot of things don't become addressed that we're not good at, and that's from our, you know, I wouldn't say we give bad customer service. It's just we don't know how to amp it up a couple levels, right? Sure. So what happens in the sales department and how you handle them, we don't have that training. Right. And it's not in our nature to deal with people like that. It
all comes back to what you were saying before, training, right? You don't just need to train someone on the system. You know, you got to train, you got to develop, you got to coach these people, you know, so that when they do, so they can expand your wholesale business, and then they can expand your over-the-counter business, right? I mean, I had a huge passion for over-the-counter business, and actually did a lot of that, you know, for the simple fact of being a Mitsubishi dealership. I wasn't going to make much money on the cars. I mean, I had to make money on the parts and accessories, you know, so I needed someone back there that actually really have those conversations, both
Mhm.
wholesalers and with customers.
Mhm.
But I had to train. You're 100% right. I had to train. I had to coach him. It was not something that was necessarily in him from the beginning,
Mhm.
but his skills for organization was, and that's what I hired for. So I hired for skills, and then I trained. I trained for performance, right?
Yeah, it can all be trained, right? I mean, it's like anything else. You can train them how to handle parts on a technical level. You can train them how to, amp up his game in every aspect, for sure.
So I love that. I think that's a great best practice, guys out there. If you're not currently doing this for your special order parts, I think you need to start doing it right away. Every special order part needs to be prepaid, regardless if it's over the counter, wholesale, or internal. It needs to be prepaid. It will hold everybody accountable for whatever that part is. It's not just going to fall on the shoulders of the parts department. So that's a good one. What
The
else?
only thing, the only thing that you can't prepay is warranty, provided that the customer comes back. But if the car's staying overnight, just hit prepaid. You can prepay it because it doesn't make a difference, right?
Yes.
And some guys with the prepaid, the implementation of the prepaid, all the DMSs allow prepaid functionality to happen. What happens though is guys are concerned about how prepaid affects inventory and reducing on-hand quantities and what does it show. It shows one, but it's reserved for a customer. That can all be worked out in 20 minutes with your DMS provider.
Just the
And
way you structure it. That's all.
exactly, guys are scared because my DMS won't handle it. It absolutely does. You just got to spend 20 minutes with the DMS support and 20 minutes with your controller to do a mock one and see how it works with relieving inventory and how it works in the books upstairs. But stuff is all a piece of cake.
And I think it's a great process. I think it's a great policy. What else would you recommend?
So number two, I would say, at least for your service department, I would get a handle on getting the service advisors to book the customer's next appointment for a special order part that they need to come back for. Get them to book that appointment before they leave. It's hugely important that you do that. I mean, it adds some weight to the amount of parts, special order parts you're actually going to get rid of, rather than being stuck with them and chasing this customer all around. Let's just get it done before he leaves. It adds a lot of value trying to clean it up.
I think that's a really clean process, is that every special order part also has an appointment attached to it.
Yeah,
and
you don't order it unless it has an appointment.
And so much so that I think it actually needs to even be written either in the notes field or even handwritten actually on that parts order form, so that we know that there's an appointment that's associated with it.
So I'll tell you one of the hangups with this process that from a service aspect that they come across is, so I'm a service advisor, I have a quote and I sell the quote. But first, I don't know when I'm going to see all these parts. So I'm selling a quote, or I'm selling random lines on the work order. I don't know when the parts are coming in. So how can I book an appointment without then making another trip to parts, and they got to dig it all up. They got to punch this thing in, and depending on the size, I mean, it could take 5-10 minutes. But here's a process that you implement to streamline that. Whenever we do a quote for service department for any part, we always put how many we have in stock. So we just go 1 in stock or 2 days away, right? So every single part, it's easy. An advisor can scan this, say, okay, look, so on this particular line on the work order that my customer has to come back for, the part that's furthest away is 2 days away. So he knows to book them on third day, right?
That's really clean. I like that, because for the most part, whenever we ask the parts department, the only thing that we really get from them is the on hand or the time it would take, but we don't seldomly ever get both. So I think that's just prepping. That's good communication back and forth between them.
Absolutely. It cleans up a lot of problems, right? Especially if you only have 1 in stock and they're like, well, I should double check that. Or they'll tell the customer, look, I have one here now. And the customer says, well, I'll call you back. I'll let you know. Okay, right now I have one. But if we miss this one and it gets sold to somebody else, we're 2 days away.
So you book on worst case scenario, right?
Right.
And that makes sense. I've actually never seen that though in a report. So is this somebody like actually handwriting it then? Because I've usually seen the on hand, but I don't remember seeing it showing. It almost like someone had to handwrite that. Is that how it works?
So handwriting is so 1980.
I know.
Right? But so what happens is every DMS allows a comment field underneath.
Okay, that's where you're putting it. You're putting in the comment
Yeah.
field.
So
Okay.
like something like CDK, you do like quantity. So I'd put 1 space CO. It adds a comment line, and I put 1 in stock. And if you needed to, you put the other 2 days away.
Cool. So and I think that's probably a good point. You don't see that comment field utilized enough because it documents and it shows that there was proper communication back and forth between. So I'm thinking of putting my dealer principal hat on. It's like that's a clean process. That's exactly what I want to see. It's like
Exactly.
and maybe even what was the advisor on it in the first place, right? So it's like sometimes I swear it's like there'd be a special order part in the back. I'd go grab it, and I would literally spend almost 10 minutes hunting down what the hell this was actually for in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it was special ordered to the dealership. There wasn't necessarily a name associated with it. Then I had to go talk to the service manager. He didn't know. I had to wait. The service advisor wasn't there. He was off that day, so I had to wait till the next day. And I was just like, "What the hell was this for?" Well, this is for so and so. It's just like, look, comments field. The comments field is there for a reason. Let's document the crap out of this.
So with special order parts, you're absolutely right. The same process that you're talking about, you trying to identify it as a dealer principal, just strolling through parts from, you pick up a part, who's this for? You don't know. The problem is a parts guy will come across this, maybe an individual parts guy, maybe a couple times a day. He'll say, I show one on hand, but it's in the special order bin. But can I sell it or not? We don't know. There's a whole process on how to handle the special order bin and special order parts that come in the door to really clean that up. But you're absolutely right. That's a problem, because I'll tell you what parts guys say. They say, they show one in stock, but it's in the special order bin, like you were mentioning. He doesn't sell it. He tells them, hey, look, it's 2 days away. When in fact he could have sold it, but we don't have a process to handle the special order parts. So they don't take any chances. They just say, well, I don't see that one. Right?
Path least resistance, of course.
The thing could be there for 90 days. Who knows? Unless you've got like a real tight program and process. But I mean, that's a conversation in itself.
No, but I mean, like let's first level, keep it simple. Use the comments field. Really, really use the comments field. Right? Document the crap out of it. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So I would say the third thing, if we're to list the top 3 of those, there's a couple more. I would say that a large percentage. So a large percentage of special order parts or idle parts inventory, or those parts 12 months later that are a huge problem, come from wholesale customers. And the more you're in the body shop, the worse it is.
Yes.
So there's really three different segments of parts that you sell to. So you sell to the shop, which includes warranty, internal, and retail. Then you sell to over-the-counter retail, and then you sell to wholesale. So out of those 3 different categories, you'll have retail counter, which has the lowest volume and has probably like a 10% return rate across the board, right? Most of it's human error, or customers just don't want it. But most of that stuff, I would say a decent percentage anyway. You'll get some weird stuff, but some of that stuff is filled from inventory. So it doesn't really create a huge problem when it comes to idle and obsolete parts inventory. But then you have the shop, which is the largest number that exists in terms of sales. They have a huge amount of parts that get returned. A lot of it, of course, is filled from parts inventory, but as a percentage, your shop is not the problem. Where you'll have wholesale is a fairly large number usually, but their return numbers are usually fairly big, like out of proportion, where the shop will order and put on so much parts inventory from parts. They'll return some, but they never use up the amount that you would get from the manufacturer on the amount of parts.
Of course.
Right? So you actually end up with like extra return allowance generated from the part sales through the shop, yet you have wholesale that will wipe that out and more that you don't have, right? So I guess the third point would be look at the return rates on your wholesale customers, and I would really key on those ones that are 15% or more, 10%. I mean, kind of the rule of thumb is 10%.
That's what I was asking you. So what is a fair amount of return expectation from your wholesale? Because I remember when I took over my dealers, we did the buy sell. I literally, we were going through all this stuff. There were multiple trailers in the back, and there was, I ended up opening one trailer, and this stuff was so old, it wasn't even documented in their inventory anywhere. But I was talking about, I mean, there must have been half a dozen bumpers, door sills, body panels. I was like, holy crap! I mean, there must have been at least $10,000 or $15,000 worth of body parts just
Yeah.
hanging out back there.
It happens to be that body panels are the worst because there's only a few specific customers that handle that stuff,
Yeah.
and of course it's low volume, and so those are usually hardest to get rid of, right? Whereas an alternator, you
can kind of bring it into stock and maybe eventually, kind of
usually
work it
find its
around.
way out, right? But body panels is a bit different. But the volume of a body order is usually, or body shops that order from you, is usually fairly big. But that also means that if they return something, it's fairly big, right?
Yes.
And depending on your dealer size, the smaller you are, the more it hurts, right?
Yep.
Because they use up returnable. Like one part could be $500. And
how do you measure that? I'm just trying to think. Is there? I don't know if I necessarily remember.
Yeah.
I remember there being a dollar amount.
Yeah.
I don't remember if it was calculated as a percentage.
Yeah, inside the DMS, there's a report to report on your customers.
Okay.
And then if it's only reporting the dollars, credited dollars, you just divide that into the sale dollars. That's in to come up with the percentage. But I mean, it's really that easy. Here's a key point though. For the majority of the DMSs, if you have a customer that's a diesel, for an example, a diesel customer, they will buy parts which have a lot of cores on them, like an injector that has like a $250 core value on it, but the injector itself is $250, so it's really $500. So you sell it for $250, well, a little better than that, obviously, with profit, but you sell it with the core, the $250 core for one injector. But when he returns it, you give him $250 back. That $250 shows as a credit, right? And they're big numbers. Like if you have
they are. They add up really fast.
With engines or transmission assemblies or diesel parts in particular, they'll have huge return values, but for the most part, the return values are from cores, and you can't control that. It's just a DMS setup. But for the most part, customers that have in particular over 15% return, those are problem guys that you got to get a handle first.
I think that's a really good practice. I mean, that's just a real good best practice. I mean, would you recommend that they do this maybe on a quarterly basis of just taking, your top, wholesale accounts and just cross-referencing? If you need to do the math real quick and just ensure that they're just under that. And if they're over, then I guess a conversation has to happen, right?
Yeah, you have to look at from a whole, right? Like it could be that it's a one-off month, and that's possible. I mean, it happens with every account, and
sure.
Keep in mind that some of this is parts been aired, and even some of this inventory, especially with the mechanical stuff, this inventory is filled from stock. But for me, at least, if you're just trying to get into this and trying to get a handle on inventory, like starting from base level, trying to figure this out, really key on the ones that have the highest returns, and you'll find that they are body shops. But here's something about body shops. Body shops, it's very competitive, right? These guys, they order such volume in the dealer world to have these body shops because of the volume, right? Because we're always pushing in annual meetings and even monthly meetings.
Well, the manufacturers are also supporting your volume. They're throwing bonuses and additional rebates out there for you to hit those volumes. So yeah.
But what happens is we don't think about, so we go aggressive, and the profit margin usually on body parts is thin, especially
real
in the
thin
competitive region, right? Sometimes it just doesn't make any sense to do business with body shops, or more in particular, you need to have a conversation so you can realign it. And
that's what I think the key is. You got to have a conversation. You need to communicate with these people. You really need to build a relationship out with these body shops, because you're right, margins are low, and but I like this quarterly, just ensuring that they're not over or if they're over that limit. Look, you're right, like you said, the conversation.
Right, you're gonna have the conversation, because look, in business, everybody has to win, and if that's lopsided. And in the body shop business, when it comes to parts, if there's a loser out of that relationship, I'm telling you, it's parts department.
It is, and look, I think you're 100% right. Look, everybody has to win at this, and
Mhm,
it needs to be overly fair.
mhm,
Sean, I really appreciate your time, coming on today, and then this was a great chat. And just to kind of recap, I think these are three great, real, actionable takeaways. That
mhm,
first one, don't skimp out on your training and your development and your coaching of your staff.
number one.
Really don't do that, right? And through
Mhm,
that training and the development and coaching, you're going to be able to set actual proper goals and objectives because you know why you're making those goals and objectives.
mhm,
Second, special orders. You need to have a process, for those special order parts. And I love what you're saying as far as prepaid, special
mhm,
orders go. And then
mhm.
thirdly, you need to do that quarterly audit, right? And just make sure that your wholesale accounts are exceeding. You said the baseline was 10%.
Yeah, so basically 5% is optimal,
Yep.
and then 10% is like I got to kind of pay attention, right? And
Mhm.
at say 15%, though that's warning, and anything over 15%, it's you got to figure out how to fix it.
And I agree with you, and I'm sure that the service and system that you guys offer also assist in a lot of these processes as well. For anybody out there that would like to learn more about what you guys are doing and how you can assist and help their parts department, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
I would say through our website, all of our contact information is there. It's a North American Dealer Parts Exchange. And of course, short form is NADPE.com. Find it all there.
That's awesome. And how can people connect with you and kind of keep on tabs with you?
So we post, technical stuff or fact-based stuff for parts department, how to help, our industry through LinkedIn. Um, Connect with me on LinkedIn would be the best, I would say.
And guys, I really encourage you to do that. Sean has posted, and Sean and his team has posted some great content. And it's how I actually became aware of you guys and wanted to connect and reach out to you. Hey, again, Sean, thank you so much for taking your time
Thanks, sir.
today and jamming with me. I'm really looking forward to putting this together and putting it out there.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Sean. Have a good day.
Thanks, sir. You too.
We covered a bunch of great topics today. What stood out most to you? Be sure to let us know in the comments section below. And don't forget to like the post and share it to keep the conversation going. You can follow Jason on all social media platforms by following Strategy with Jason. You can find him pretty well everywhere you can share content. I hope we were able to get you thinking. And until the next time, this has been Nathan with Digital Dealership Solutions. Have a great day.